Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and this is Stitched Up. So today's video is going to be my experience with the Closet Core Patterns Kelly Anorak. So I have had this pattern for about 3 or 4 years now and I've never got around to making it, but Sheffield Social were hosting Sew Anorak August and I decided to take part, except I decided to do it in September instead of August, and that was mainly because I had a lot going on in August. I was changing jobs, I was going on holiday for a week, so I just didn't get a chance to do it. So I made it my mission when I returned from holiday earlier this month to make a start on the Kelly, and I'm really pleased to say that I've completed it. This video, as you've probably noticed by the title, is part 1 because I am going to make another and I'm going to make the other version. So I'm going to do a bit of a review, my experience, my journey making a coat of this type, and give you my thoughts on both versions basically. So this particular video is about version A, which is the version with the hood. Now version A does have cuffed sleeves. I decided that I didn't want cuffed sleeves only because I wanted to line it. So with the Closet Core Patterns Kelly pattern, you can purchase the additional lining expansion pack because the original coat obviously isn't lined. Now I always feel cold, always. It's cold and rainy here in Yorkshire today. The weather has very suddenly changed from summer to autumn and I've got a big thick winter jumper on. I feel the cold really easily, so I knew that for me to get the most wearability out of this coat I would need to line it, and with that I wanted to interline it as well. So I was already setting myself up an extra challenge in the fact that I'd never made this coat before. I will be honest, I have made a couple of Closet Core Patterns, formerly Closet Case patterns before, and I haven't always found their instructions intuitive for me, shall we say. So bearing that in mind, alongside a much more complex construction garment, I knew that adding in an interlining and a lining as well, this was going to be a bit of a project for me. Now the fabric that I chose was a twill fabric, beautiful twill fabric in petrol from Stoff and Still. I will leave a link to it down below if they still have some. They did have it in other colourways as well, but I have to say this fabric is beautiful. It really is lovely, and I didn't think it was too expensive either. Perfect weight fabric for this type of coat, and yeah, I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. The lining fabric was very kindly gifted to me by Sian from Kittenish Behaviour when I took part in the KB pattern swap a couple of years ago, I think it was now, and I believe that she got this fabric originally from Spoonflower in the USA, and it's a beautiful galaxy print. It's got a lovely sheen to it, a very nice handle as well, so it's not difficult to sew, and it's perfect for a lining, so it goes really well, and I'm really pleased with the way that that's turned out. The interlining was a brushed cotton that I bought very cheaply from Walton's, which is my local fabric store. I think it was £4 a metre. You can pick up loads of this type of fabric this time of year, and I wanted an interlining that was going to give me that extra warmth but not be too bulky, and this has worked out really well, so I'm really pleased with my choice. All the hardware and notions for this coat I bought from the trimming shop or from eBay, so again I will leave links down below to those if you want to go and check those out. I did change the sizing of the eyelets on the waistband for this coat, and the only reason for that was because the eyelet size that was recommended in the pattern instructions, I couldn't find a die for my green hand press machine that was in stock basically, so I went up a size and it's worked fine. It wasn't a major catastrophe, shall we say. Size wise, I made a straight size 12, and I did add in a couple of lengthening adjustments. So I lengthened the sleeves by 1 inch, and I also lengthened the jacket by 1 inch above the waist as well, so that it dropped the waistband seam. Including 1 inch extra in above the waist dropped the waistband seam and the pockets as well, and I also added on an extra inch length at the hem just to give me an extra couple of inches, because I think this pattern is drafted for about 5'6", 5'7", and I'm 5'10", and that worked out absolutely fine. All you have to bear in mind, obviously, though, is if you are going to lengthen your coat or shorten your coat, you are going to need to take that into account when purchasing the zip. The pattern calls for a 26-inch separating zip, and I bought a 28-inch, so I knew that I would need to add in 2 inches of length to make sure that everything aligned up correctly, and that worked absolutely fine. So yeah, apart from that, I made a straight size 12, and that worked really, really well. I'm really happy with the fit on that. My body measurements put me sort of below and above that slightly, I would guess, but with the amount of ease that was already added into the pattern, I felt that I could probably go with that and it would be fine. I would say that this jacket is not a very sort of loose fit. It is quite fitted, so I'm really, really pleased with how the fit has come out on this coat for me. But I would say that if you're planning on wearing quite a bulky jumper underneath, like the one I've got on today is very, very bulky, and it would probably feel quite tight with that. But certainly for a normal, you know, sweater type jumper or even a hoodie, you know, I could wear underneath the coat and it would be absolutely fine. But you do need to obviously bear in mind that, you know, you're going to be wearing layers underneath a coat of this type, so you do need to add in extra ease that you wouldn't normally necessarily do. Right, so moving on to what I found about the construction with this coat. Now, the outcome, the finished coat, I absolutely love. I think it's got some really, really unique features and some really good features that you generally find in ready to wear that I think a lot of sewing patterns don't really include, which is really nice. I have really enjoyed the process of putting this coat together, and I didn't think I would say that, because I'm very much the type of sewer that when I start something, I want to continue with it for the entire day until I get it finished. And this type of project you can't complete in a day. I'm a fairly quick sewer, and I would say that this took me probably 2 full days worth of sewing to complete from start to finish. And that's already having traced off the pattern. Now, the thing with this coat is that there are a lot of pattern pieces, and I find that quite overwhelming when I'm starting a project if there's lots of pattern pieces there, because I'm really worried about losing them, about them, you know, flapping all over the place, that kind of thing. And yeah, I did find that a little bit overwhelming, and it made me a little bit hesitant to start. But I think once you can sort of get over that, if that kind of thing bothers you like it does me, I think one tip when you do have a lot of pattern pieces is to group them all together. So I grouped my main bodice pieces together, the plackets and facings together, the hood and the hood pieces together, and I did it all that way, and that made it a much more manageable project for me. I cut out the outer shell in one evening, and then I worked on the lining in a separate session, because cutting all these pattern pieces out, especially when you have to do them again out of the lining fabric and then again out of the interlining fabric, is quite a task. So I would recommend that, you know, you break that up over different sessions and don't try and do it all in one go. I did need to seek some help. I didn't use the blog. I understand that Closet Core Patterns do have a blog on various steps and some of the obstacles that you might come across in some of those steps. I didn't need to use that. I could pull on the resources that I already have within the sewing community and people that have already made this up as well. There's lots and lots of advice out there, and some of the steps that other people have taken and how they've overcome certain steps within the project itself, that I found that was ideal for me. I would say that on the whole, the pattern instructions are very good, and, you know, do lead you through the project in an order that makes sense. I did come across a few little hurdles, and what I would say is that if you are making this coat with the lining, then you need to use the instructions for the lining expansion and not the original coat instructions. The lining instructions in the lining expansion do have the full construction instructions for the coat from start to finish, so it's not just about how to attach the lining, it actually starts right from the beginning of making the coat itself. So I hope that makes sense, and which is really good because it means that you're not having to sort of flip backwards and forwards from one set of instructions to another. What I would say is that I think Closet Core Patterns are currently reviewing the lining expansion instructions. There have been a couple of people within the community that have highlighted a couple of issues that they have found with the project itself. Now, this coat has been made loads of times. I'm sure you're aware of that. You know, it pops up on social media all the time, and it's been a very, very popular pattern since it was released. I've taken on board a lot of other people's comments on various aspects to this pattern, as to what they've found easy, what they've found difficult or more challenging, shall we say, and I've taken those comments on board, but I've sort of, you know, I've wanted to approach this sort of independently, I guess, in how I find it. Now, obviously, as I've just mentioned, they have withdrawn the lining expansion pack currently while they review it. I'd already previously bought the lining expansion pack a few years ago when I bought the original pattern and it first came out, so I've had to follow the instructions that were in the lining expansion pack, and I can say that I do understand why they've had to withdraw it. If you look at the pattern layout on the lining instructions as they were, there are a couple of pattern pieces that it tells you to cut out of the lining, which actually you don't need. Now, I don't always follow pattern layout per se, as in how to position the pattern pieces on the fabric, because I have to make adjustments to my pattern pieces, including lengthening, etc. It doesn't always work for me, so I generally will do my own pattern layout. However, with something like this that's got a lot of pattern pieces, I did look at the pattern layout just to make sure that I'd got all the pattern pieces that I needed for the actual coat itself, for the lining, and I did find that it was telling you to cut out a couple of pattern pieces from the lining that I subsequently found that I didn't need, and that was a little bit confusing and a little bit frustrating as well, because it meant that I'd cut pieces out of fabric that I didn't actually need. I'd not seen that actually mentioned in any previous blog posts that I'd looked at where people had made this coat before and found that an issue. Maybe I've just not come across it, I don't know, but I would just bear that in mind. If you do have the original lining expansion pack, there are a couple of pattern pieces that it tells you to cut out that you don't actually need. One of the other challenges that I came across as well was when it came to inserting the zip. Now, I would say that the zip insertion instructions are very straightforward, and if you follow them to the letter, you know, your zip will go in the correct way. However, in the instructions for inserting the zip, there is a step where it tells you to align the edge of the zip with the raw edge of the placket, and then it tells you to stitch 5/8 of an inch in from that. Now, this step really confused me, because if you tried to stitch at 5/8 of an inch, it meant you would be stitching through the metal teeth of the zip. So that didn't make sense to me at all, and it left me scratching my head. So yeah, I couldn't understand why it was telling me to stitch 5/8 of an inch from the edge, because that meant that I would be stitching through the metal teeth, which obviously you can't do, and you wouldn't want to do either. So I ended up stitching at a width that I felt comfortable with, and that worked out absolutely fine. So what I would say is there are a couple of little steps within the instructions that tell you to do things like that don't quite add up, but I would say that you can generally figure it out for yourself. That was the only step I found that really left me scratching my head. Now, I know a couple of people as well mentioned issues with attaching the hood. I found the instructions for the hood constructing the hood really straightforward, including the lining, and obviously I put an interlining in there as well. Now when it comes to attaching the hood to the main jacket, there is a couple of steps, because you have to wrap the raw edge of the hood facing around the placket of the jacket to attach it, and you can't do that in one full step. Now I would say that the instructions aren't very clear about how you do that, and I ended up doing it my own way and doing a little bit of hand stitching. So that was another step within the instructions that I found a little bit awkward and a little bit challenging, to try and figure out a way of how I could get the jacket and the hood attached completely, with making sure that everything was encased correctly. Now I'm not sure whether the fact that I had used an interlining made that a little bit more challenging than it needed to be, but that was a step that I found not quite straightforward. But I did figure it out in the end, but it just meant that I had a little bit of stitching to do, a little bit of hand stitching to do on the outside of the garment, which is hidden underneath the hood and you can't barely see it. So one of the other steps that I took with this jacket was the gusseted pockets on the front. Now I originally didn't particularly like the look of the gusseted pockets on pictures that I'd seen of other people's coats. However, so I made the decision, when I came to the step of inserting the pockets, I made the decision of deciding to just stitch them down on the front bodice pieces, which I very quickly regretted. When I'd actually done it, I decided that I didn't like the look of it, so I unpicked it and did follow the instructions for the gusseted pockets and stitched them on as the pattern tells you to do. And with hindsight, I'm really pleased that I did that, because it just looks so much better. I do think this is one of the features of the jacket that makes it look really professional and really ready to wear, which is really nice. The instructions for doing the gusset pockets is very, very straightforward, but what I would say is that these pockets in the pattern instructions are not lined, and I did feel that they would feel better when you're using them with a lining in there, because obviously you have the underside of the press stud on the inside of the pocket, which obviously your hands brush against as they go inside, and I'm just thinking about the wearability of that as time goes by. I have used a little bit of interfacing on the back of the press stud in the pocket just to sort of strengthen it a little bit, because yeah, I just wonder about the wearability of that over time. Now I do know that Sian, when she did hers, fully lined her pocket for that reason, because she didn't want the back of the press stud to cause any wearing to the main body of the jacket, and I do wish that I'd done that now, and I think in my next version that is a step that I am going to take, and make sure that I do add a lining to the pocket. It should be fairly straightforward, but yeah, that is another thing that I think would, you know, just prolong the life of this coat. So the final obstacle that I found a little bit of a challenge, I would say, is the insertion of the press studs on the placket of the jacket, which is the final step that you have to do. Now this part is the most nerve-wracking part of making this jacket, because obviously by this point you've put a lot of work into this jacket, and when it comes to inserting press studs and eyelets, you don't get second chances. And yeah, I was quite nervous about inserting the press studs and took my time over placement of where I wanted my press studs to be, because I wanted them obviously spaced out. The fact that I'd added 2 inches onto this coat meant that I couldn't use the recommended spacing that it gives you on the pattern. So I had to work that out myself, and so I took a fair bit of time to make sure that the press studs were going to be evenly spaced and look good. That bit was fine. the bit that I found the most challenging was actually when it came to inserting the press studs. Because of the depth of the placket that is in this pattern and where the zip is placed, it means that the press stud, both the top and the bottom of the press stud, have to be inserted very, very close to the edge of the placket on both the top of the jacket and the underneath. It means that the top press stud insertion has to be very, very close to the edge of the placket, and the bottom press stud that you press onto has to be inserted very, very close to the zip underneath. That bit I found quite challenging, and I would say that when I next make this jacket, I'm going to think about tweaking that. I don't like how close the press stud is to the edge of the placket on the front of the jacket. I just think that it's too close to that edge, but I couldn't move it in any further because it meant that the underside press stud would have to be on top of the zip, which obviously isn't going to work. So yeah, I do think, personally for me, I think that it would be much better if the plackets were maybe a little bit wider and the zip placement was slightly different, so that it just means that your press stud could be centered in a little bit better and not quite so close to the edge of the jacket. I did have a look before I inserted the press studs. I did a little bit of searching on Instagram and looking at other people's Kellys to see if this was just an error that I'd made somewhere in my insertion of the placket or the zip. But to be honest, when I looked at all the other Kellys out there, I could see that press studs are very, very close to the edge of the jacket in practically all of them. So I don't think that's anything that I've done wrong in making the jacket up. I think it's just that's how the insertion has to be, so that you can get the press stud to fit and that it's not going to encroach on the zip. Yeah, so I'm going to look at that, because I think I'm just a bit worried about over time, you know, using the press studs with them being that close to the edge of the jacket, that, you know, that might cause an issue in the life of this jacket. So yeah, so they're the main challenges that I came up against, I'll be honest. And apart from that, I would say that I do love the finished result. It fits really well. So yeah, so the only other challenge I had was how I was going to cut out the interlining, because obviously the pattern instructions don't give you any instructions for doing that. So I needed to make a decision on whether I cut the interlining from the lining pattern pieces or from the outer shell pattern pieces, and I ended up going with the lining pattern pieces. And it was a bit of a fudge, I'll be honest, but the end result worked out quite well. The only challenge that I ended up finding with it was because the lining is attached to the back facing, which is made from your shell fabric, and obviously I didn't want an additional back facing piece, so it just meant that I needed to attach the interlining to that back facing piece as well, and make sure that I got it the right side so that it would sit behind the lining in the main jacket, if that makes sense. I figured it out, but it had me head scratching a little bit on a couple of occasions. But obviously, you know, if you don't need to do that, then that's absolutely fine. You know, that's not a quirk of the pattern or the pattern instructions at all. I'm really pleased that I did interline it, because as I mentioned earlier in this vlog, I would have found it a little bit I don't think I would have found it a jacket that I would want to reach for on cool autumn days and cool spring days. Yeah, so I'm really pleased that I have put an interlining in there, because it's just the perfect weight now. The features of this jacket that I really, really love are, I love the pleat on the back yoke. I think that looks so professional, and yeah, it's just those little features that make it feel elevated, much more like a ready-to-wear jacket. So I love that. I love the yoke detail on the front that is flat felled. All the seams on this jacket, on the main construction of the jacket, are flat felled, or you can do faux flat fell as well. I did flat fell all of them that I was told to do, and I'm really pleased that I've done that, because I think it's just going to add so much extra strength to the jacket, and increase the longevity and the wearability of it and the lifetime of it as well, which is obviously what we want when we've put so much effort into something. I love the waistband casing detail as well. I think that looks really good. I top stitched that at 1.8 millimeters, which is my general top stitching width, if that makes sense. And what I did first was I used a lot of tailor's chalk and tailor's tacks in this project to make sure that everything was lined up absolutely precisely, because I think if it's one of those projects where you can't skip those kinds of steps really. Quite often I will eyeball things when I'm making dresses and and normal dressmaking, but with something like this I didn't want to eyeball it, because I thought if anything's out it's really going to show up. So I made sure that when it came to positioning where the waistband casing needed to sit, I measured absolutely precisely from the yoke and drew on a line parallel to the yoke with tailor's chalk. I tacked my casing down before stitching it on, just to make sure that it was all perfectly central and at the right level. And yeah, I'm really pleased that I did that, because it's just pretty perfect, to be honest. I did the same with the pockets as well. Attaching the pockets, I used tailor's tacks first to position where the pockets needed to be and to make sure that they were absolutely spot on, and I'm really pleased with how they look as well. They are bang on where they need to be. So again, it just makes it give it a much more professional finish. So I would really recommend that if you are going to tackle something like this, that you this is one of those projects where you really do need accuracy, and you do need to make sure that follow the instructions to the letter when it comes to positioning pockets and positioning where your eyelets are going to be and where the press studs are going to be and all that kind of thing. You need to make sure you're absolutely accurate. Don't eyeball it. I think it's one of those things that we tend to do when we've been sewing for a while, because we know generally by sight what 5/8 of an inch looks like, but I really wouldn't recommend it with something like this. Just make sure that you do measure everything so that you just get that really neat finish. So apart from those few little challenges that I found, I have to say that I absolutely love the end result, and I love wearing this coat. It is so nice to wear a coat like this where the sleeves are the right length for me, where the waistband hits me on my waist and not on my lower ribs. I'm 5'10", I'm long bodied and I've got long arms, and I've always struggled with ready to wear coats because of those very reasons that I've just said. And it is so nice to put this coat on and it fit me properly, and I feel great wearing it. And yeah, I absolutely love it. I love it so much that I'm going to make another, and I want to make another pretty soon, and I'm going to make View B next time with the high collar and without the waistband casing. I really fancy making that out of waxed cotton. For winter walking, I think that's just going to be amazing. Again, I am going to interline it. I am going to draw on the experience that I've had with making View A to hopefully make View B that is just going to be, just as great, and that I'll get just as much wear out of. So the plan is, following on from this video, is that I'm going to make View B up, and then I'm going to do another video of View B and see how we get on with that one. But yeah, despite the few little challenges that I came across within the pattern instructions, and obviously having to interline this as well, I've really enjoyed putting this coat together, really enjoyed the process, and I'm absolutely in love with the end result. And I know that I'm just going to get loads of wear out of it. So I hope you've enjoyed that little review of my experience of putting the Kelly together. I know that there are loads of reviews out there of the Kelly, so I would advise, don't just take my review as gospel. It's just been my experience of it, and that's the thing with sewing, that we all have different experiences of how we how we can follow a pattern, how we put things together, and you know, we all find these things different. If you are planning to make this coat, I would advise, if you are a beginner and you've never tackled a coat before, choose an easier pattern, because I think if I'd have tried to tackle this probably even 2 or 3 years ago, I think I would have got really frustrated with it. If you are, you know, if you have made a couple of coats before, even obviously much simpler coats than this, have a go at it. If you like the style and you want to have a go at it, have a go at it. There are loads of resources out there to help you. There are lots of reviews out there as well that various people have done of how they found the construction and how they found the pattern. And, you know, take a little bit from all of that and have a go, because, you know, what have you got to lose? If you have any questions, or, you know, you want to ask me anything about the making of this coat, then please feel free to do so in the comments box down below, and I will try and answer any questions that you have. I hope you've enjoyed my little review, and I'll look forward to being back with you really soon. Take care. Bye bye.